Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. I'm here with two researchers of the JFK assassination, and we're going to be talking in a specific area about the Dallas Police Department, some of the corrupted activities, and obviously a little bit of the climate of Dallas that was going on before JFK's arrival and why it's important to the assassination. But Paul, do you mind introducing yourself? And then Gil, you can go next.
Yeah, hi Robbie, hi Gil. Paul Abbott's my name. I'm here in Australia. I've been very interested in the Kennedy assassination for 30 years. Many different aspects to it that I've been fascinated about over the years, but I've been particularly active more so in the last year or so, really taking a deep dive into exactly what happened around across the weekend of November 22nd, and particularly with what culminated in Lee Oswald shooting.
Hi, my name is Gilbert Jesus. I'm interested in the Kennedy assassination, and I have been since the 1960s, off and on. And I've done some research on the case against Oswald, and I believe that Oswald did not shoot anybody, based on the evidence that I've uncovered.
When it comes to looking at the assassination, every researcher focuses in a particular area, and I'm trying to break down the importance of each one. But I want to ask your guys' opinion on why you think the Dallas Police Department should be examined when you're looking at the Kennedy assassination, whether it's to give context to certain areas or certain things that just kind of seem odd about certain behaviors or certain investigation practices. And then maybe we can dive into a little bit more detail about certain areas where their involvement can go.
Well, for me, I would say that, especially now that we're so many years after the case, really, we've all that we're left with are statements, testimonies, and people's records of their own movements and what they said and did. But I think we can still take a lot from the actions of people, and I think the Dallas Police Department, not all. It would absolutely not be at all fair to tarnish all of the DPD with the many injustices and outright wrongs that took place over that weekend. But I do think that we're left with a lot of actions of members of the DPD that really can, I think, still tell a great deal.
What got me interested in the Dallas police and what their tactics were had to do with the police lineups, the way they conducted the police lineups. For me, it was taking a look at how they did this, putting police employees in a police lineup with Oswald, putting a Mexican and teenagers in the fourth lineup, a couple of blonde guys in the third lineup. I mean, they're obviously conducting these lineups in such a way as to make Oswald the only choice that a witness could make. And plus, you have Oswald handcuffed between two detectives. One guy's wearing a red vest and the other guy's wearing a brown jacket, and one's dark skinned, the other guy's got blonde hair. I mean, these fillers that they use in these lineups, they not only not match Oswald's description, they don't match the description of any of the witnesses. So there's no way that they're ever going to be picked. So that's what got me interested in this. I'm saying to myself, he's yelling and screaming that he's being railroaded and all this stuff. And I'm beginning to wonder, wait a minute, something's not right here. And so that's what got me interested in it. I started looking at them, what the police are doing. And I'm finding out that witnesses are being intimidated, witnesses are being threatened, not only by them, by the FBI. And I'm saying to myself, this is not what a criminal investigation would be. Oswald's being held in communicado. He's not allowed to call a lawyer until Saturday. I mean, all of these documents start popping up, and you're saying to yourself, there's something rotten in Denmark. So the old saying goes, something's not right here. And so that's what got me interested in this. And the deeper I dig, the more I find out that this isn't anything out of the ordinary for Southern justice back in the 1950s and 60s. I mean, you had a guy who was, you had 3 civil rights workers who were killed in 1964, and one of the 7 guys that were convicted of killing them was a deputy sheriff. So, I mean, corruption in the police department and things like that, that's nothing new. In that era, there's nothing new. Now, that's no reflection on the Dallas police today. Dallas police today are very professional in the way they do their jobs. I've seen them on several police shows, and these guys are really on the ball. But back then, it was a different story. They had no problem arresting someone who wasn't guilty. You see, because they had this culture back then that whoever they arrested was the guilty party. All they had to do was fit the evidence to convict them. And they did. They convicted people who were innocent of crimes and sent them to jail. One guy even got the electric chair, and Henry Wade knew he was innocent. So an examination of the police department, I think, is something you should do.
And what really interests me and what I've uncovered around the Oswald shooting is how much the press were systemically regarded as part of the DPD. You know, it was part of their structure. Curry put out like literally a procedure or instructions telling people, telling the DPD that they needed to use the press as much as possible. They were their PR arm. I didn't know that before looking at the Oswald shooting a lot more closely, and it stands to reason. You know, they needed the public on their side. They needed to be seen doing the right thing at all times, and even more so in that weekend when literally the whole world was watching them.
I'm sure you guys know, but through obviously the JFK stuff, you come across a lot of different theories, which I'm sure we'll go into and discuss. But when I bring up a point, it might be a theory or just somebody's perspective that I've come across when it comes to certain individual episodes or something like that. But is that normal of police procedures? I mean, obviously the media is used for informant purposes, and information and tip-offs are given to media, to the Dallas police or to any police agency. Then obviously the police agency can reciprocate the same when it comes to certain information and certain details. That's why we have a statement from that one reporter that was having a cop that he hired to drive him to Parkland Hospital and drive him around for that weekend. That cop knew the information about Jack Ruby shooting Oswald before the reporter even did. He had to call back to his press people to see if he can pay this guy money to get. That's another corrupted activity. The officer has the information, and he's asking for a bribe, and he'll give him that information. Whether he's off duty or not, he's still acting under the law. So that's another example of corrupted activity, but he had that information before the people that were even there had the information that it was Jack Ruby.
Yeah. Yeah, I think probably, especially in that weekend, I think anything that they did in terms of the way they handled Oswald would be seen as enough, and I think the system and the powers that be that would take care of, if obviously he was allowed to get to stand trial, would kind of step in and make sure that the mud stuck. So yeah, that's how I think it all swung into action. And this just not going through the motions so much, but really just being seen to be doing everything that they thought they ought to have been doing. I think.
We think of corruption as bribery. Cash payoffs. You were mentioning that before about the officer taking money, but the corruption can occur in other ways. I mean, you can. Like you're a bar owner like Jack Ruby, you give the cops free drinks, you provide them with women, you provide them with gambling, chances to make money, and maybe even a fixed game so that they win. I mean, there's different ways of corrupting police, taking corruption, gratuities, whatever it is. So it's not only just cash, it's favors you do for them or whatever. And there's evidence that occurred, that Jack Ruby was someone who procured women for the police officers, that he provided them with free liquor, that he even broke the liquor laws, because back then in Dallas, if you were serving mixed drinks, you couldn't serve mixed drinks in a public bar. It could only be in a private club. And Jack Ruby was serving mixed drinks, and the cops were there. They never said anything to him. If he stayed open after hours, they never bothered him. As a matter of fact, he had one of his managers, Nancy Perrin Rich, who was interviewed by Mark Lane under the name of Nancy Hamilton. and she said that she had a fight with Jack Ruby, and I guess he assaulted her. He hit her or something, and she went to the police to file charges against him, and they said, "I wouldn't do that if I were you." So she got pissed off because the cops wouldn't file a report. She wanted to file a report because what she wanted to do is she wanted to sue Jack Ruby civilly for money. And in order to do that, she had to have a police report proving that the assault occurred.
Wait,
So the
you
cops
said
wouldn't make
Nancy Perrin Rich?
yeah, Nancy Perrin Rich.
I have a clip up about Betty Jean Sims. Betty Jean Sims has the exact same account. This is a problem for me, and this is going to lead to my own little theory. But dude, there's so many testimonies that are almost exactly the same in the Warren Commission, where I'm like, there's no way this happened the exact same way with the exact same detail and the exact same wording. Where I'm like, did they just start switching names around and start creating? Because I can't find photos for half these people. I'm like, come on. Like, just take a photo of one person, attach it to the damn documents, put it in the filing cabinet where no one will see it for 60 years. But Betty Jean Sims talked about being striked by Jack Ruby, and she went to go report it to a police officer, and the officer just laughed in her face and then pointed over to another person who was a part of the Variety Guild of Artists, or the Association Variety Guild of Artists, that Jack Ruby was obviously a part of. And this guy was just like, there's nothing we can really do about it. He's connected to a lot of the thing in the culture of this scene. So that is something for Jack Ruby. But obviously, there's been a big theory or big idea about how Jack Ruby got into the basement. But this also leads into the factor of how these police individuals were connected with Jack Ruby, whether it's the B-Girl operation that a lot of people were talking about that Ruby was a part of, whether it was being able to serve liquor past a certain time, and all these things. Dallas police were hanging around the nightclub, whether it was off duty or if it was on duty. Some of them testified that for reasons that they were doing so was because they was stationed in their area. They would just come by, briefly check in, and not have a drink. Well, we're having a lot of conflicting testimonies of that. Some people state that I never really knew Ruby besides a casual operation. And others, Jack Ruby's bringing his girls by their corner on the traffic division, trying to talk to them, invite them, and he's handing out membership passes to like everybody.
But with the statement given after the Oswald shooting, by my calculation, there's about 90 members of the Dallas police that were interviewed for either the Dallas police investigation of itself as the shooting, the FBI or the Warren Commission, and of the 90 total personnel that were interviewed, I count 44 that admitted either at least knowing of Ruby, or being friends with him. So that that really speaks to the ratio of people that knew Ruby. Whether it's because they worked on the same patch that his clubs were on, or like we've said, they hung out at his clubs, and all sorts of things. That association really is there. It's it was clearly very entrenched, and people even admitted to it after the context of the Oswald shooting.
Yeah, I got a kick out of the video with Chief Curry saying only 4 officers even knew Jack Ruby personally. I mean, how many times did this chief of police lie about things? I mean, it's just, again, if it's a legitimate investigation, I mean, why do you have to do things like this? Well, we questioned every single officer, 1,200 officers in the department, only 4 casually. Some, like you said, some of them had to go through to the club on calls or during their normal duties, but only 4 people even knew Jack Ruby personally. Yep. And then you got the other witnesses saying that even Henry Wade is drinking for free at his club. She even saw Henry Wade drinking at his club, and Henry Wade says, "Hey, I didn't know him. Once he shot Oswald, all of a sudden nobody knows Jack Ruby. Oh my God, he's persona non grata now. We don't know anything about him." It's amazing. It really is.
Seth Cantor said it. I think, I don't know if he wrote it in an article or one of his books, but he said, come Sunday afternoon, there wasn't a cop in Dallas that knew Jack Ruby.
Yeah. Clearly, this is important to the case because obviously Jack Ruby was hanging around the Dallas Police headquarters all weekend, and it seemed like he was at a lot of major events and stuff like that. But when we talk about Jesse Curry, do you believe that he was involved in the conspiracy, or do you believe a lot of this was because he was obsessed with media attention and the reception of how the Dallas Police obviously looked? Dallas Police, a lot of things can be attributed to protecting their reputation. And in my opinion, if you look at like maybe they got the wrong guy or they are trying to put the blame on somebody and there's a lot of investigative eyes, it would be really easy to silence them. Obviously, we can get into more detail about that a little bit later on, but a lot of stuff with not letting him speak unless it was that media conference where he said a couple things and then he was, taken away. There's kind of like at one point, maybe did they think they got the wrong guy? Now they just got to make the evidence kind of fit.
Do you mean with Oswald?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do think it was Ruby that shot Oswald. I don't think it was anybody else.
I think Curry's a difficult one because he was such a firebrand in terms of, he would hold a press conference at his desk in his office. He would hold court in there and anywhere. I think, whoever was involved in setting up Oswald's shooting, all they needed to do to a degree was let Curry be so true to form in terms of just being so transparent with the press. Make sure he was told, whatever they might have wanted him to tell. I don't know how far, how much the contact with Curry had with the actual plotters. I don't think they would have needed to have brought him in to a degree. I mean, it was perfectly, he did them a massive favour when, at 10:20 on the Sunday morning, he was telling the press exactly how they would transfer Oswald to the county jail, including being taken down the elevator. So he literally laid it out as he did the afternoon before by saying, if you get here by 10 o'clock the next morning, you won't have missed anything. I mean, I don't think he could have done anything more to help them, regardless of if he was in on the plot or not. I mean, I believe it was him that ultimately came and knocked on the door and Fritz's office and asked him if he's ready. He was the one that ended the interrogations at Fritz and Holmes and Sorrells, and it seems like a whole bunch of other people were in on Oswald's last interrogation. It was Curry that actually came, knocked on the door, and said everything's ready. Are you to Fritz? So if that's culpability, I'm not sure.
I think there was a video where Curry, they asked him, "Are you sure that you got the right man?" And he says, "We think so." That was his answer. But Curry was a Johnson man. He wasn't for Kennedy. He was a Johnson man. He's the one who drove Johnson from the hospital to Air Force One. And he's in the airplane when Johnson's being sworn in, and he's in this photo op. I mean, even what's his name there, Jack Valenti, was pissed off because he said he's trying to hog the camera. You know what I mean? When Johnson's being the oath of office, and I'm thinking to myself, this guy's the chief of police. There's a cop killer running around in his city right now that killed one of his own men. May have killed the president of the United States. It may be connected. And this guy's on Air Force One with Johnson. Johnson's got plenty of Secret Service to protect him. There's all kinds of people in that plane. What the hell does he need the chief of police there for? So Curry, to me, I think he's a kind of I'm not sure if he's involved in a conspiracy or not, but he obviously isn't a Kennedy guy. He's definitely not a Kennedy guy. And for some reason, he's not doing his job after the shooting. He's not doing his job. He should be out there saying, you go here, you go there. And you know what I mean? He should be the guy in charge, and he's not. He's on the plane getting his picture taken. And it's very, very strange, some of the things that he was involved in. And then he's the guy who plans the Oswald transfer. He's not going to move from that. He's not going to. I mean, if it's me and the sheriff calls at midnight and says, "We got to move this guy. Okay, we got to move him, and we got to move him now as soon as possible." You move him. That's it. You don't wait till 10 o'clock in the morning. You say to the press at 10 o'clock in the morning, "Hey guys, I'm sorry, but there were some problems and we had to move him during the night." That's it. Simple.
Yeah. Or you just ignore the calls altogether, like I think he did.
Yeah, I mean that's Why would you do that? I mean,
Mm.
and take your.
I
Well,
think
I can see taking your phone off the hook. That's what we were talking about before. Taking your phone off the hook. I can see that because, but you still got to be available to the department. You know, send a cruiser by the chief's house and wake his ass up and say to him, "Hey, we got a problem here. We got to move this guy now," and see what he says. That's what I would have done.
I think the most innocent way to maybe regard Curry was that he was a figurehead. He was the chief of police, and he just assumed that the system below him, therefore, the ranks, everybody, and he said it himself. Everyone knew what they had to do. He just let them get on with it. He didn't. He had no oversight of the details of the plan, and even as late as Sunday morning, I think it was Batchelor or Stevenson. I overheard him still on the phone to Sheriff Decker saying, "Well, if you want us to, we will." In the context of it still hadn't been decided who was actually going to carry out the transfer of Oswald. So I think Curry was just happy to keep ignorant to it all, while being as vocal as he could for the sake of the press and his promise and his regard for them. He came out and said, the Oswald shooting only happened because I promised you people that I would show you Oswald's transfer, and I keep to my pledges. So, someone that can actually come out and hang the hat on that is, there was clearly something not right there.
Well, we talk about the Dallas police, not all of them being involved in the conspiracy or being involved in this action, but obviously they're taking orders from individuals. So if you wouldn't look at Jesse Curry as much when it comes into the conspiracy, who would you look at to be someone that you would be like, hey, you obviously this is not proper procedure? The only issue I can see with Curry is that there had to be a hierarchy in the Dallas Police Department that obviously they got to take their orders from somebody. Curry would be a good example. Fritz would be another one. But they're looking at every single move they have to make has to go through Curry. And if Curry doesn't have his phone active and you're trying to make plans because there's threats on to Oswald's life, that's a problem. And now you're not really, they should be thinking about what's the best thing to keep this prisoner safe. What's the best thing to make sure that he stands a trial and the public gets an answer on some things? But they're more worried about what's Curry going to say? What does Curry want to do? How should we do this? Fritz was like, let's transfer him now. Let's do it right now. Whether that's conspiracy or not, whether there'll be no press round, I don't know. But he was already talking about making an adjustment before even thinking about asking Curry. And then it's W.B. Frazier's testimony. He doesn't get a hold of Curry because the operator says that Curry's phone's out of order. Who comes to relieve him? Talbert. And Talbert says, oh, what's going on? And then the guy just informs him on his thing and then goes home. Look, at the last 5 minutes of work, if someone comes up, you're damn right I'm pushing them off until I'm off shift. But that's what he did, basically. He gave them a brief summary of the situation he's dealing with, and he went home. That's not, I mean, at that point now you're relaying off information for events that have been happening for a couple of hours based on however much time that person was able to explain to you. So you're not really understanding the full context of what's going on when it's threats to Oswald's life and protection procedures.
Well, I don't think that the shooting of Oswald was, a sanctioned, plot by the DPD. There obviously wasn't, laid down, and rankings and all that were necessarily a part of it. But I think moves happened that definitely suited a plot to be, fairly quickly formed. As soon as it might have been decided as soon as whether it was Ruby or someone else even that was going to take a shot at Oswald at the press conference. As soon as that didn't happen, I think that would have been the catalyst for going, right, well, we have to the next possible time or best possible time we could get him is when he's being moved out, because he was charged with President Kennedy's murder very soon after the press conference, apparently. Therefore, he wouldn't have been, and this was probably more the press's feeling at the time, was that Oswald wouldn't be so visible and so in touch, so to speak. They wouldn't see him. He'd largely be behind closed doors and duly moved off to the county jail. But I think when nothing happened at the press conference, and whether, like I said, that was when Ruby was supposed to make his first attempt, assuming that it was premeditated and all of that. they had their circumstances laid out for them, it would be when Oswald would be transferred, still to take place in front of the press. And I think the moving parts, or people that were part of the plot kind of knew how to bring things together. So if you want to talk about someone maybe overarching it, I really sort of take a lot of credence in, or agree a fair bit on the Westbrook theory. He was the captain of personnel. He knew the ins and outs. If we want someone who had a lot of first-hand knowledge and really knew the nitty-gritty of all the goings on in the organisation of the DPD, Westbrook would have been the person, surely. And I think with his suspect movements in the immediate aftermath of Kennedy's shooting and what happened with J.D. Tippett, then that makes him a pretty good candidate to finish the job, as it were, when it came to Oswald. I think he would have had the cunning and the resources to have put together that plot to involve Ruby and make it look like a crime of passion.
And Westbrook was connected with the CIA too. He got a job in Vietnam. I think it was 66, maybe. I think it was 1966, where he was contracted to train police forces in South Vietnam, and he left the Dallas Police Department. He was also at the Tippett murder scene. He also handled some of the evidence at the Tippett murder scene. He was also present at the arrest in the Texas Theater. I mean, this guy was all over the place. And they say, I don't know if it's true, but they say that he had an FBI agent riding with him in his cruiser. So, and who was at those scenes too. And I think that was Bob Barrett. I'm not sure, but the CIA, according to this testimony, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, the testimony of James Wilcott, he was supposedly Oswald's paymaster, the CIA. He says here in the testimony that there was no doubt that the CIA was as thick as thieves, those are quotation marks, with the Dallas police. Several different individuals or firms in Dallas had been involved in one way or another with acting as cutouts for arms shipment to the Cuban exiles for the invasion at the Bay of Pigs. So there was a connection between the CIA and the Dallas police. So if the CIA was behind all of this, it would seem that somebody was controlling Chief Curry, regardless, because Curry was just steadfast. It doesn't make sense that he's so steadfast in moving Oswald particular time, unless he's receiving orders from someone else. Could that someone else have been H.L. Hunt, the oil man? It could be. I mean, who knows? How did Curry get his job as chief? Who appointed him? You know, the funny thing I find about this chain of command of the Dallas police is that the mayor is not in it. People say, oh, the chief of police gets his orders from the mayor. Not in this case. The city manager was the one that was in the chain of command. The mayor had nothing to do with the police department at all. It was the city manager, Elgin Crow. He was the one who was in the chain of command. He was Curry's superior. But take a look and see, how did Curry, I don't know, I have never looked into it, but how did Curry get his job? Who was behind it? Because back in those days, if you wanted a police job, you go grease some politicians' hands, or you go see somebody who's influential and you pay them a few $1,000s and they put you on a police department. I mean, it didn't take much. You know what I mean? You take a test, you take a police test. Let's say they got 28 guys they're going to put on full time. Okay, so they get a list, send down a list of 50 names. Out of those 28, let's say you're number 44. So you turn around and you pay your way onto the 28 and you're on the police department. So there's ways of there was so much corruption going on at the time that you have to take a look and see who was controlling the chief. Was the chief being controlled? Like you said, was he just a figurehead, or was there somebody above him that was controlling him and making him do things a certain way because that was their guy?
Yeah.
I mean, it just seems strange that the chief's sleep had more priority than the safety of the prisoner. You know, it just seems strange to me.
Well, wasn't he on the phone to Earl Cabell at the time when Oswald was being transferred, Curry? And I mean, there's a CIA linkage right there.
Well, I think there's probably more of a connection with the FBI because if you look at like obviously the FBI telling Curry to shut up. I mean the FBI agents were obviously getting relayed information when it came to the threats against Oswald. They were either informed like 30 minutes later or someone picked up a call that would inform the Dallas police about it later. There was obviously something going on there where they were talking back and forth. And I think Curry was promised some things, and obviously we talk about grease in the hands. Curry was like, "Oh my God, I'm gonna be able to get my agents or be able to get an involvement with the FBI or get some type of thing from J. Edgar Hoover," until he popped his mouth off to the press. And then Hoover told him to shut up. So obviously there became a problem there, but I would see more of a connection with the FBI's involvement there. I mean, obviously Curry thought he was doing something right, but then I think it was such little contact. The FBI was only just like, here's some scraps off the table or something like that. That when Curry did eventually speak to the press and it became a problem, that's when the FBI started to become more involved about what was going on. I mean, we can't explain why the FBI was able to take a bunch of things out of evidence for the purpose of eliminating evidence of duplicates, anything of that sort. And when they returned it the next day, they had more evidence. It's like your job was to eliminate things, not come back with even more evidence. And obviously they can get into the sketchiness of like the fingerprints and the lifts of palm prints off rifles and stuff like that, where we have a video of obviously a bunch of people running in, and whether you want to say that was lifting fingerprints off Oswald or whether you want to, I've heard people say that they already had it when they fingerprinted them for the lineups and things of that sort. So obviously there's a lot of things here. What we're doing here in this episode is raising these flags for why people need to look at this and not just skip to certain areas that they find the most interesting. Please just look at everything.
I think the plan to silence Oswald would have been a fairly straightforward one. I don't, obviously wouldn't have been as complicated as how President Kennedy was murdered. I think it literally was a case of leaving a certain door unlocked at the right time, and maybe giving Fritz the heads up to stand a little bit clear because something, we've heard reports, or however you want to feed that to him, stand clear, something's going to happen as Oswald's moved through. I think it could have been as compartmentalized as that.
Well, it's Lavelle that was standing right beside him, right, during the transfer with the white hat and the white suit. If you notice the photos where Ruby's, there's a couple of them. One I have to use for YouTube because they don't like you having the gun and everything involved. And but there's one where Ruby's dashing out of the crowd. And at the angle he's coming at, Oswald's clear in view, and Lavelle's not standing off to the side. He is directly out of shot. So in the camera shot, you only see Lavelle's hat. Oswald is perfectly lined up for exactly where Ruby's jumping in at. And he's not looking in Ruby's direction, really. He's kind of off to the side. But I go, when do you allow the suspect to walk himself out of the police department? Why isn't there someone that's like right in front of him or grabbing him and moving him along? You're kind of just walking with him at a pace.
And so maybe they were operating on the assumption or the presumption that something would happen. That the whole weekend, if something's probably going to happen, so handle with care in terms of protecting ourselves. I mean that's the one when I look at that same photograph of Lavelle and Graves and Fritz being so far out and Montgomery being behind doing absolutely nothing. It's just like, well, okay, here we are. We've bought into the table. Over to you to finish the job, as it were.
One of the reasons why they might not have seen Ruby coming out of the corner, although Lavelle admitted that he saw him out of the corner of his eye with the gun, but the camera lights were so bright that they shined when they come out. They shine. When they come out of the jail area, and you look, and Fritz comes out and he looks in Ruby's direction before they come out, and then he tells them to bring him out. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know if he's looking directly at Ruby or not, but he comes out and he looks in the same direction where Ruby is standing.
Yes.
And so then he tells them, okay, come. He goes like that. Okay, come on. They bring him out, and it's like, here's the sacrificial lamb. He's wide open. They turn the lights on. The bright lights come on, so now you can't see anything anyways. And the car is already supposed to be in position to take them, and it's not there. And even Lavelle says, in his testimony, he says, I was surprised when they told us it was all clear. We expected the car to be there, and the car wasn't there. It was still backing down the ramp and blew the horn. Matter of fact, it almost hit Ruby when he came out. It nearly missed him. And so all of this stuff was supposed to be settled. It was all supposed to be arranged. So when he said it's all clear, what did he mean? If the car wasn't in position, what did he mean? Did he mean that Jack Ruby was in position? So, I mean, you have to wonder about all of these things. And that's what the message was, that it was all clear.
Yeah, and I think the lighting as well, that is clearly been used as a factor, but I think it's more of an excuse. There is some footage that was taken by ABC cameraman James Davidson back at the jail, outside the jail office, and he actually follows his camera, follows Oswald as he's getting out of the elevator, being walked through the jail office. It cuts to when Oswald has started being led through the cordon of detectives, and you actually get to see the lights from front on. And yes, they're very bright, but when we say that, we talk about what people said they saw at the time of the shooting. Some interesting little details, like Lavelle saying he thought he saw the gun, and Combest, who was standing literally behind Lavelle, he said he saw Ruby lunge out and knew what he was going to do, and he testified that he said, "Jack Ruby, don't you do it." So how much was the lighting allowed to be made out to be a factor? I think no doubt they were bright, but the lights had been well and truly set up. They had been on for quite a while. There's raw footage from KRLD TV from I think it was Home Eventso's camera down in the basement, and the lights are on the whole time since before the armoured car was parked at the top of the ramp. So people can't even say that all of a sudden the lights are on and we're blinded. They'd been lighting up the scene for up to half an hour, maybe just a little bit under. So people can't complain that they were such a factor when they'd been on for so long.
Well, it's that relationship with the press we mentioned earlier about why does Dallas police care so much about informing the press? Well, how come when the press and all their reports, they kind of vary, but most of them weren't checked with their credentials. And when it came to entering the Dallas Police Department or entering the basement and being there, a lot of people said they must have just assumed because I had WBAP on my camera equipment, and they just assumed I was part of the press. I mean, that's another factor of how Ruby could have got let in if we don't just go with someone let him in. There's a lot of varying factors when it came to security that were really just not appropriate. But have you ever came across a testimony for you that stuck out in your mind as just weird or just something that just doesn't fit the rest of everyone else's statements? For instance, and you guys can respond to this one, but this is my example. James Standard's testimony. Obviously, James Standard was a reporter that was in the police basement. He's the one that said someone screamed, "You son of a bitch," when Jack Ruby shot. Everybody else does not hear that. No, I mean, you could say they were paying attention to their camera equipment at the time, but I haven't really came across another person that has stated that. And I know that's the thing where we talk about it, whether it was Lavelle or whoever, this is Jack, you son of a bitch, when Oswald gets shot. But he's the only one I've seen that stated that in a document. And to me, the ones you got to look at when you're looking at documentation who are the most suspicious are the ones that were police officers that were giving a testimony or statement, and they just kind of answered the questions. I was like, oh shit, you know how this works. Like, don't let them ask you things and then you respond with a quick yes or no, because you'll start giving information you necessarily might not want to give.
No. Yeah. So I'd just say that initially the DPD didn't interview a lot of the press because most were from out of state or overseas, so the logistics of it and the cost apparently was a factor for not somehow still trying to reach the dozens of press that were in the basement. Not even people in the news truck outside and people that had come and gone, but there were dozens in the basement, and they were completely overlooked by the DPD. I think in the Dallas police investigation, there was, 20 that were interviewed in total. I think that's being very generous. And there were 10 that were acknowledged as being there. It's in their report. Stephen Alexander, Fred Reinstein, Milt Soyson, Paul Sisko, I think. People like that were acknowledged, but were never followed up to give an interview. Tom Pettit, potentially the most visually visible member of the press of all. He, to answer your question, Robbie, he would by far be the person I'm just still most curious about. He never made a statement, was never interviewed. Even we see people bring out books in later years, give interviews to the Sixth Floor Museum, all of that. Pettit didn't do any such thing. He's an interesting one, and Theo Waldo, he's pretty interesting as well. From the I think it was the Fort Worth Star Telegram. His testimony is very funny, and I think that's probably something just to note very quickly is that the FBI and the Dallas Police. I don't know if this was standard. Standard technique, and Gil, you might know, but we don't see transcripts of their interviews. They're only statements. So how much interpretation and censorship went into forming those statements based on what the interview subject said or didn't say. And obviously we've seen cases of that, more famously to do with the Kennedy assassination, people seeing their statement and saying, that's not what I said, that's not my signature. So I think there might be a degree of that with the press as well. Because when you look at someone like Theo Waldo's statement, I'm just reading my notes on it now, it does not make sense where he was standing at the time of Oswald's shooting. Henry Rabin, who else? Terence McGarry, Jerry O'Leary. They cannot, Peggy Simpson, they cannot definitively say where they were at the time of something as monumental as Oswald being shot. It absolutely puzzles me.
I think I read somewhere where Sergeant Patrick Dean was the one who yelled out, "Jack, you son of a bitch, you got me in real trouble now." Something similar to that. I think I read that somewhere, but I forget where it was, Robbie, to your point, about somebody saying that. They heard somebody say that. But you know what? I'm going to tell you something. Oswald was a dead man from the time he was arrested, because Brewer heard one of the cops say, "Kill the president, will you?" And when they were wrestling with him in the theater. So Oswald, this was like I said, whoever they arrested was the guilty party. That was their mentality, and that was the culture in the Dallas police. And so Oswald was a dead man from the time. He was never going to make it to the sheriff's department. There's no doubt about it. And because they had no evidence on him, really, they had no evidence. When they arraigned him for killing the president, they had no evidence against him at all.
Well, they weren't so focused on him killing the president. They were focused on the cop aspect. I mean, look at Charles T. Walker's testimony when he was instructed to put a hat over Oswald's face as they're walking out of the theater because apparently the volatile reactions of the crowd. But he makes a statement in the HSCA volumes, which is really interesting, which he just states, the crowd was more sure that this was the killer of President Kennedy than we were. It was we figured we were getting this guy on killing a cop, which is why I think they acted so extreme and were actually trying to be very involved in a lot of things. The officers seemed like they're going to get this guy down. It was because of the officer aspect. I don't believe that any of them really cared about the killing of Kennedy. I think it was just something that the people assumed based on it was an arrest happening that day.
They didn't even have to do that. All they had to do was arrest him on the charge of assault and battery on McDonald. That was right there when he.
See, I don't believe he assaulted McDonald.
Well, okay, but I'm saying if he did, that's the charge you arrest him on. You follow me? Because now he's not going to be arraigned until Monday morning because it's a weekend. The court's already closed. He's not going to be arraigned or appear before a judge until Monday morning. So you got enough on him to hold him for the weekend, anyways. Before, if the judge releases him on Monday or he makes bail, whatever, that's one thing. But that's the charge you arrest him on is assault and battery on a police officer. Boom, that's it. The guy, But that whole thing with McDonald, that's really strange to me. McDonald goes for his waist first. That's not the way you pat somebody down. You start at the top and you work down the body. That's the way you search someone. You don't search someone by starting at their waist. So that whole thing about that story, and then he got his finger caught in the gun, and but he never received. You try that. You try pulling a hammer back on a revolver, stick your hand like this inside the gun, and let the hammer go. Pull the trigger, see how much it hurts. He didn't go for any medical treatment. The whole thing stinks. But my point being, and I hate to be rambling like this, but my point being is that Oswald was a dead man from the time he was arrested. Once they arrested him, he was all done. And he knew it. He told his wife. He looked at his wife and he said, everything's going to be okay. She says, but I could see it in his eyes. He was scared. And you can see it at the midnight press conference when his voice breaks, when he says, somebody in the hall, and his voice breaks, asked me that question. And he knows he's in big trouble.
Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say that he was marked for silencing as soon as President Kennedy was sped out of Dealey Plaza. I think that was part of the plan, was to eliminate him as quickly as possible. And the fact that he lived as long as he did is kind of almost somewhat miraculous, I think. It could have been as simple as a police officer storming into the book depository where he was meant to be inside, but potentially could have been on the steps, as the prayer man theory goes. And because Oswald was seen on the steps, that didn't happen. So moved back to contingency number one, and obviously killing Tippett to justify like we say, the big response, the big furor of chasing this cop killer and apprehending him, and maybe shooting him in the theater as well. That would have been the next plan.
This is how they go. This is how they close cases of people that they arrested the wrong people. They'd end up dead. They never make it to court. Right? You're in 1960s. You're a black man in the South, okay, and you get arrested for a crime, and you either make bail or something. Somebody comes and pays your bail, and they let you out. So what does the sheriff do? He lets you out. He waits till midnight, lets you out, and down the road there's a pickup truck full of Klansmen waiting for you. The next morning they find you hanging from a tree, and the official story is, well, we released him, but he must have felt guilt, so he went and hung himself. And that's the way it was in the South. If you were black and you were accused of a crime, you had an all-white jury, and you were in big trouble because that you had no chance. You had no chance at acquittal. If you were innocent, you didn't make it to trial, or you ended up getting the death penalty. And it's true. There's an old joke about it that this guy is a white man. He's drunk. He hits two black guys, and one comes through his windshield. The other one ends up in a tree. So the cop gets there, and he says to him, the guy's drunk. Instead of arresting the white guy for drinking and driving and killing two people, he turns around and the guy says, well, what's going to happen now to me? The cop says to him, he says, well, we'll charge the guy in the tree for leaving the scene of an accident. And the guy who went through your windshield, will charge him with breaking and entering into a motor vehicle. I mean, this is the way they did things back then. Okay. Medgar Evers was shot and killed in his driveway, shot in the back and killed in his driveway while his wife and kids were in the house. All right. It took them 30 years to charge the guy that killed him. 30 years to charge the guy. Why? Because they tried to indict him, and an all-white jury wouldn't indict him because he was a white guy. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that happened in the South in the 1950s and 60s. If the man was innocent, he didn't make it to trial. And if the man was one of us, so to speak, he never even got charged for the crime. Look at the guys who killed Emmett Till in 1955. 14-year-old kid who supposedly whistled at a white woman. Her husband and her brother went after him and tortured the kid. I mean, and did they get convicted? No, they didn't get convicted because an all-white jury wouldn't convict them, right? And then years later, just recently, I think it was just a few years ago before she died, she admitted the kid never even whistled at her. They killed the kid for nothing. So, I mean, it's just, this is the kind of nonsense that went down in the South that you call Southern justice. That if you were black, whatever the cops said, you didn't go against that. Okay, the black workers in the Texas School Book Depository, they're not going to go against the official version, whatever the cops say, because If I'm black and I'm working in the Texas School Book Depository, first thing I'm thinking is they're going to blame us for this.
Well, the number
They're
of
going to blame
statements
us for
from
this.
Texas School Book Depository employees, and they were black, that just said they didn't know Oswald or never associated with Oswald. I mean, they're definitely thinking, I don't want to be associated with a cop killer. But it's like, you work with the guy, whether he's here with a month, you guys work on the same floor, you guys are involved in the same groups, you have had to seen him at a certain point. Most people who said they saw him said that, yeah, but we've never actually had a conversation or interaction with Oswald. But how many witnesses do you think were intimidated or scared to testify about something that might be different than the official narrative because of the reputation of the Dallas Police Department at the time? The reason why I say that is, if you look, I think I sent this to both of you guys, but Ben Molina, the reporter who did the oral history interview, it's very dry. I don't think he honestly knows much. He probably was barely involved, but he says something at the ending, and it's a statement from another reporter. I'm blanking on his name right now. I have the clip up on my YouTube for you guys to look at.
Yeah, it'd be Huffaker. Robert Huffaker.
But he mentions I think it might be Huffaker or it might be somebody else, but he mentions a story. And he says that this reporter was riding with a Dallas police officer, and they saw a black man with a hat on, like one of those, deputy hat, not a deputy hat, but cowboy hat type thing. And the cop got out of the car, walked over to him, asked him a question, and as the guy reached up to pull his hat down, the cop punched him in the face. And then he states, and he says, the reporter asked him, he said, "Why'd you just hit that guy in the face? I'm going to be in trouble I was just part of an assault thing that just happened here." And the cop said, "You learn pretty quick down here, when someone goes and grabs for their hat, they're usually going to run." And to me, that illuminates a little bit more about how they handled certain procedures, whether they were going to take an active approach because they've had maybe prior incidences where someone had run. Doesn't mean this guy was going to, but now they're acting on more of, this is how things work down here, which you get to Oswald. If a guy reaches for his belt, maybe to adjust his pants, or maybe to say, "Hey, I have a gun at my thing here." Well, you just went and tackled the guy, and then now you got this whole incident that happens, because I still can't get over if McDonald was punched or not. That comes from McDonald, but then he doesn't mention it later in oral history interviews that he did, or when media interviewed him. But then you look at Charles T. Walker, he said there was just a scuffle that started to happen. And then a bunch of people jumped on top of Oswald. Charles T. Walker grabbed him by his neck. So it's like, yeah, this guy's screaming police brutality. And then I've had someone say, well, yeah, he was trying to get the media to understand that, play up the media to make it look like he's innocent. I go, yeah, but he was saying it on the ride back too. On the way to the police department, he was sitting there saying, "Guys, what's going on? I didn't know it was such a big charge to be carrying a gun." And then they said that Oswald did, Charles T. Walker's testimony at least says that Oswald did most of the talking. And he kept stating things like, "I don't understand what's wrong with having a gun. You're telling me an officer was killed." It's like, who are you playing it up for? You're playing it up for a couple officers? That's not the media. He didn't save it and wait till he got to the police department to start shouting his innocence. He was shouting it leaving the theater and then on the ride back to the police department.
Mm. This tangent makes me think of the City Hall workers that were removed from the basement in about 2 hours, or no, maybe an hour and a half before Oswald's shooting. And a lot of these people were porters, maintenance workers, and they were obviously part of the scenery, and most of them had been employees across City Hall for many years. So, but they were standing at the far end of the basement car park, watching the media set up and everything, and they were told to move. They had to seal the basement. Everyone had to be removed to while a search was going on at the car park. And most of the workers, if not all, I think were black, African Americans, and there was one instance where two of them went to go find a television, and they walked directly around to the locker room in the sub-basement level of City Hall, and they encountered a man in there and you can read it in the Warren Commission testimony. Both were not pushed to identify the man, and both were very guarded with their words. They were warned by the man not to. It wouldn't be any use to them hanging around in the locker room if they wanted to watch Oswald's transfer on television, because it wouldn't be shown live anyway. So that's in itself is an interesting little story. But the fact that these two men, Alfredia Riggs and Harold Fuqua, were clearly, you can read between the lines. There was a bit of intimidation there, and you wonder how much of that is to do with what you were talking about, Gil, in terms of the Southern Justice and obviously the racial tensions as they were back then.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what they did. And matter of fact, Henry Wade sent an innocent man to the electric chair in 1954, I think it was. He had evidence that the guy was not guilty because the tire tracks at the murder scene didn't match the tire tracks of his car, and he withheld that from the defense. So the whole system, it wasn't just the Dallas police, it was the DA, the whole system, the whole prosecutory system. Now, just to give you an example of how bad it was, when they went to search Oswald's room at his rooming house, they took with them an assistant DA and a justice of the peace who had the powers of a judge. I mean, I've been on searches before. I've worked part-time on police departments. I've gone on searches before, never took a judge with me. I've never taken an assistant DA with me. I mean, why the hell are they there? Because those guys are connected to the police department, and they're going to do whatever the police department does. And it just so happens the same Justice of the Peace, David Johnston, that went to the Oswald as a search, is the same guy that filed the charges against Oswald, that heard the charges against Oswald, and didn't issue him a defense lawyer, even though by Texas law he was entitled to. As soon as he was arraigned, if he didn't have a lawyer, the judge was supposed to appoint one to him, and he didn't do that. And he says, well, he said something at the arraignment. I don't remember what it was. All the cops that were there at the arraignment for the Tippit murder heard Oswald say something, but nobody could remember what he said. They all had amnesia. What's the chances of everybody forgetting the same thing? I mean, it's a big joke. The whole case was a big joke. And I don't believe Oswald was involved at all. I don't think he shot anybody. I think he was telling the truth when he hustled them through the hallway, through the reporters, and he says, I don't know what dispatches you people have been given, but I emphatically deny these charges. And then he get him into the room and he says, I have not committed any acts of violence. I have nothing against anybody, and I have not committed any acts of violence. I believe he was telling the truth. He didn't shoot anybody. And you watch his body language, you watch what he says and stuff, and he's saying every time he gets before the press, he's saying these police officers are not allowing me to have legal representation. All of these things that they're doing, this is not what happens in a criminal investigation. It is not, his constitutional rights are being violated.
Someone did make an attempt to get an attorney for him. I don't remember if it's Fritz or not, but it was their guy, someone that he had worked with previously. It wasn't the person that Oswald was requesting for. There was a lawyer that was reached out to because there had been prior experiences with this guy in the past. It wasn't someone Oswald requested, though. So whether Oswald denied speaking to that guy or whether this guy knew how Dallas police would, if you have a friend who's a lawyer, you have them come down, maybe they can overlook some of the procedures and things that would easily get this suspect free because you might have been very kind of dastardly in the way that you handle procedures.
I'm aware that the ACLU tried to wanted to see him, or were trying to see him, but they were afraid of the Dallas police. They didn't want to lock horns with the Dallas police, and the cops were kind of like, well, first they said he was offered and he didn't ask for a lawyer, and then they said he refused it. There's a difference, But they were getting two different stories, so they were suspicious, the ACLU, but they were afraid of the Dallas police because of all this corruption. Hey, you cross paths with the cops, you could end up dead tomorrow. So, and a lot of witnesses were like that too. They were afraid to come forward to the police because
Miss Lopez,
they had a reputation. They had a reputation.
Miss Lopez, who apparently saw Jack Ruby hand Oswald a gun at the time, which is like, I only think there's like 2 statements like that throughout the whole Warren Commission. But they start off their thing by saying, I do not want this reaching back to the Dallas Police Department, where me and my family are afraid of the Dallas Police Department.
Yeah. It's amazing how many, we talk about DPD, but it was amazing how many reserve officers were used for particularly with the Oswald transfer. Sparingly, I think some were used for President Kennedy's motorcade, which is generally what reserves, if I'm not mistaken, are used for, is very, very much an auxiliary extraordinary circumstances like an emergency event or a big show or fair, something like that. But the fact that there were, by my count, 20 reserve officers in the vicinity of City Hall, and I think 10, as many as 10 were down in the basement at the time of Oswald's shooting. That, to me, is a little bit curious as well. You're relying on unpaid volunteers who have to buy their own suit. Kenneth Croy, who I think we all know to have been very suspicious that weekend, included.
Well, I mean, have you ever come across someone that says that there was an unidentified officer in the basement? I think I mentioned it to you in your episode, but I came across a statement that there was a guy in the basement when like these 10 to 15 officers went down there to go search the basement one more time as ordered to. And the guy told him, hey, there's no need to do that. We already searched. The next thing you know, they're getting orders to go up to the street level and start protecting for when the armored truck's going to enter.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that instance, but there was an unidentified reserve officer that the two, well, one of the other reserve officers who were moved away from the basement car park where the service elevator and the stairs were up to the annex building. I think it was Worley that said there was another officer hanging around. I didn't know his name, but Reserve Captain Arnett and Sergeant McCoy, they were nearby, so he must have been okay. I think that was William J. Newman. He was a reserve officer that was always that whole morning stood right, literally under Commerce Street, that end of the basement where there's a door that is under the ramp and it goes down into the engine room of the sub basement. He himself he gave some pretty crazy statements as well. Said that he saw someone come down the ramp, not wearing a hat, climbing through the railing. And then another statement or two later, he said that he wasn't sure if it was before or after the shooting. So he's a funny guy, but I think that's one of the unidentified people that a lot of people think didn't know the name of was. I think it was William J. Newman.
Well, when it came to certain scenarios where officers could have been involved or were maybe more honest officers could have been involved or weren't involved, like Roger Craig, he wasn't active duty when the motorcade was going through. And then I'm sure there's a couple other officers as well, too. I'm blanking on some names right now, but there was officers that were not on duty that were arriving either on the 24th or the 23rd, the day after the 22nd. Because I believe this all started when Kennedy even arrived in Dallas. I don't believe this was just an Oswald situation thing that the arrest at the theater, this is when we start having this certain protocol start. I believe it was with the protection of the motorcade as well, too. There's a lot of lackadaisical approaches to security, whether that was intended or whether that was ordered by Secret Service that certain officers stand down. But obviously you had searching endeavors and officers that were, I think me and Gil talked about in one of his episodes, where there was a statement from an officer that was trying to move a broken down pickup truck. And he decided to give the guy a ride to where his other truck would be to help get this situation fixed. That was like 2 hours or maybe an hour before the motorcade was supposed to arrive. And that was because it was running late. So it was supposed to be around that time. And then you have the seizure victim. I have about 10 to maybe 11 officers whose statements about what happened during the shooting of the president in Dealey Plaza that are just responding to the seizure victim call. And that's where a lot of people say that's suspicious, whether that was planned or not. I don't know, but that's worthless testimony. All you're doing is telling me where you were before, and then next you know where you were when you were just paying attention to an ambulance person pick up, just standing there probably, not really helping out.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, thinking about the preparations for the motorcade route, I mean, I think we all know that the fact that the motorcade was allowed to, make that twist and turn up Houston Street and then down through Elm Street underneath the book depository, they didn't have to do that. The only thing that was, if they just stayed on Main Street, I think the only thing that was preventing, and Forrest Sorrells, I'm pretty sure he said this in his Warren Commission testimony, they would have violated local traffic laws or statutes if they'd crossed over the median strip to get to access the Stemmons Freeway on ramp. So I mean that I think, and I gather for someone like Mark Lane, that was one of the first signs that something wasn't right in Dallas that morning, just on that alone.
Yeah, I get a kick out of the video where the news reporters are asking Henry Wade, how do you evaluate Oswald as a man? He says, well, I think he's a man who planned this assassination months, weeks, or even months in advance. And I'm sitting there laughing, saying to myself, they didn't even know the motorcade route until like 3 days or 4 days before the assassination. They didn't make it public. How could Oswald plan it months or weeks in advance? That's bullshit. All that is just they're trying to promote Oswald as a bloodthirsty killer. Like the report that in the theater he supposedly said, "I got me a president and a cop, and I'll take one more too," or something like that. I mean, it's ridiculous, the stuff that they were saying. And
Well,
when you take
Charles
a
T.
look at
Walker's testimony, they bring that up. I got two more to go or something like that when he was shown that statement. And Walker says, I've never heard him say that.
yeah, it's ridiculous. Well, that was what was being reported on the news, saying that. I don't know where they got that from. They probably got that from some overzealous Dallas cop. But one of the people in the transfer, let me just say something about the transfer. One of the people that interests me in this transfer is a guy named Lieutenant George Butler. Butler was in the basement. I think he was cleaning out the back of the armored car or something. According to this article in Ramparts, that's what I was looking at before, that Butler told Penn Jones Jr. that half of the Dallas Police Department was Ku Klux Klan members, and he tried to get him to publish some kind of Klan thing or something. It says here in the article that he was in the overall charge of the transfer of Oswald. I don't know if that's true, but it says that he gave the all clear to bring the prisoner into the basement, and I don't know if that's true, but it says here that was in 1961 when he tried to get him to do that. But George Butler was security for H.L. Hunt. He traveled with H.L. Hunt, the oil man, and was part of his security entourage. And the FBI report said he is very far to the right in his thinking. That's what the FBI said about him in his teletype. And the interesting thing about him is that he gave a speech in October of 1961 at the National Indignation Convention Committee first meeting. They had a convention in November. And here's a coincidence for you. The National Indignation Convention in Dallas in 1961 was, guess what date? November 22nd. Kennedy was killed on the second anniversary of the very first meeting of the National Indignation Convention. Isn't that strange? But I mean, it's just another one of those coincidences. There are so many in this case. But it was all of these anti-Kennedy speakers would speak at this convention, and it all started because some major in the reserve, Air Force Reserve, went to an Air Force base in Texas and saw that they were training Yugoslav pilots because the Kennedy administration had just sold certain jets to Yugoslavia, which was a communist country. And they were training their pilots in Texas, and this started a whole bunch of bullshit in Dallas. People were enraged over Kennedy for selling these and training these pilots in Texas to the communists. But he was involved in that whole thing, and he criticized the selling of the jets and everything. He was more than just a police lieutenant. That's the point I'm trying to make. And he was there in the basement when Oswald was transferred.
He was acting very suspiciously as well. I've mentioned Theo Waldo before. He was obviously a reporter that had just come over from Fort Worth, and he testified that Butler was the go-to on the DPD that weekend to find out about movements and things to do with Oswald. I think he was a lieutenant for the patrol division at the time. He was Patrick Dean's superior officer. So anyway, Butler was cool as a cucumber apparently all weekend, according to Waldo. and but and he even helped to usher the press in from Commerce Street, saying, come in, the transfer's not far away. But Waldo testified that Butler was trembling and he was sweating and he was just showing signs of being incredibly stressed in the minutes leading up to Oswald coming out, and that in itself is pretty suspicious. But Seth Cantor interviewed Butler, I think in the late 70s, and I'm glad he raised that. He asked, you were seen as acting very nervous or agitated. How come? And Butler said, that's because I wasn't happy with the security arrangements. I thought they were inadequate. I was worried something was going to happen. So make of that what you will. But he didn't have a hands-on role that day. He did search the back of the truck. Very minimal testimony from Butler.
And he was never called as a witness.
Yeah, to the Warren Commission.
He's not on a witness list. He was never called as a witness.
Do you believe the Oswald that was arrested on the 22nd compared to when he was shot? Do you believe that was the same Oswald? No, I do not mean two different people. I mean that if you look at the Oswald when he was arrested and when he was probably should have been given time to speak his case, he was very active and a little bit more energetic, able to actually speak about things. Then you're telling me that, 2 days almost later, I don't know what conditions he's being treated on. A lot of people of the press were kind of concerned whether he was getting food or whether he was getting adequate sleep or anything of that sort that was going on while he was arrested. I don't know how much he did sleep, but a lot of officers didn't know either. And then we see the one where that's being walked out. Well, he's passive. Well, what's the media going to assume if you haven't given him information on any of his conditions? They're going to assume, oh, well, he knows his charges, and I guess now he's tired of lying about not doing it. He's just passive. It's like, no, maybe he's beaten to the point where he knows that we just got to get to trial or something of that sort. I mean, obviously it's connecting a line, and I'm not trying to border on too much of speculation, but obviously if you look at the video footage from the start compared to the finish, that's two different personalities right there.
Yeah, I mean, he was. I'm not sure. He was complaining about not having a shower. For I think that was held off for a full 24 hours, maybe longer. So in that regard, he was, clearly not. That would have big impact on someone's mental health as being kept in, subhuman, no dignity and things like that, of course. But do you mean like literally it's a different person that was brought out and shot, or
no?
You're just saying from
the mentality aspect. That's why I said I don't want to confuse two different people. I meant just mentality. He's a different Oswald in the sense of that he's just not, you have your family visiting you in jail and they're all concerned for your well-being, and now you're starting to get a little bit upset and emotional because your family's now concerned and putting those ideas of like, maybe I am in some serious shit.
They say that he looked at Ruby just before Ruby stood out, and he smirked. Some of the members of the press said that Oswald smirked, and I don't ever see that in the footage you're talking about, Robbie. I don't know, Gil, if you think that either, but I think he was just literally looking over to a question he heard from Ike Pappas. Do you have anything to say? So I think people when they look at the figure of Oswald coming out before he shot, that a lot has been attributed to him, that he was smirking and that he was, they had this air of indignation or resignation. It's hard to tell. I think for his safety, I think he probably would have been hoping to get to county jail, but he might not have had that level of insight. I don't know, but it'd have to have taken a toll. He was in police custody for 45 hours, I think it was, 46 and a half hours. That'd have to take a toll.
I guess we'll never know for sure because they didn't record anything. They didn't record any. They didn't take any transcript. They didn't have. They had a court stenographer. They had a courthouse there, so they had a court stenographer they could have called over and had them transcribe the interrogation sessions. Didn't do that. A lot of things they didn't do. There were problems with the chain of custody of the evidence. There was all kinds of things that the Dallas police didn't do. Now, was that planned? Or was it just because they were inept? Who knows? Because by not doing these things, they allowed themselves to be able to tamper with evidence. They were able to do different things that they wouldn't have been able to do if they had a solid case. And so I don't know. Oswald, his mentality, he was agitated at times. You could tell he was agitated, and that's why, people will argue just because a guy says he's innocent doesn't mean he's innocent. Well, that doesn't mean he's automatically guilty either. You got to look at what he's saying and how he's saying it. And I believe that he was telling the truth, that he really wasn't the shooter. And if you can get to that point, and that's where I am, while everybody else is trying to solve it, I'm at step one. It's not him, okay? And then they can go from there. But I can't tell you who killed the president, but I can tell you who didn't kill the president, from what I've seen. And I don't believe Oswald was involved in either one of those killings. I don't believe he was. Involved in the shooting at Walker's house either, because the FBI claimed that the only witness, the 14-year-old boy, Kirk, he got to the fence in 2 seconds, according to the FBI. How does Oswald get completely out of range from his view in 2 seconds? It just doesn't make sense. I don't think Oswald could have been gone in 2 seconds if he had been beamed aboard the Starship Enterprise. I mean, there's just no way he could have been out of sight that fast. So I don't believe he was involved in that either. The kid never saw him, and he did see some guys in the parking lot doing something in cars. They could have been putting guns away. Who knows? But I don't believe that he was involved in the shooting.
And they had to kill him at all costs to stop that from coming out, because
this would be the point.
He wouldn't have had much to say, but that in itself is damning. So yeah,
it's much easier to frame somebody post-mortem than it is while he's alive. You know what I mean? You take care of him, you get him out of the way, then you tamper with the evidence to make it look like he's guilty. I mean, to me, that's what happened here. Will we ever know the truth? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever know the truth. There's still files being withheld, and they're trying to get them released. Trump said if he gets reelected, he'll release the files, but who knows? Because the CIA's behind it all.
Did you ever come across the Decker exhibits, where Bill Decker had his own set of interviews with witnesses? And what are your thoughts on that one? Because to me, that's pretty interesting. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't say that you could trust them or they're honest, but I think they add a little bit of weight from people that we don't have testimony or statements from. I mean, I don't know how much the Dallas police's interviews and statements affected the Warren commissions compared to what the FBI neglected to interview, but there's a good portion that are largely just records of the Dallas Police Department. They also had a filing cabinet, apparently, by Mary Spencer and Mary Stevens account that was given to the National Archives. Nobody knows what was in it, but apparently it was information relating to the JFK assassination. And one statement stated it was the 3 people that were arrested in the railroad cars. Some more information on their backgrounds. So that's a little bit suspicious.
Well, so many red herrings, so many false leads, and maybe by design, all these little flares to divert our attention from potentially maybe some very straightforward sequence of events. Things might all be not as complicated as it's been allowed to become by the powers behind it all. Distract the people, distracted persons, often the most malleable or the least informed.
What would be the most revealing to you about the Dallas police, either during or after the assassination? I mean, after all the events have passed and time has kind of go on, do you think that it's more revealing afterwards, like their activities afterwards, or just any statements or anything you might have come across?
I think a lot of the cover-up happened by people that weren't part of the plot. And I think that I know that's definitely the case with the Kennedy assassination. People simply looking the other way, or not doing a normal aspect of their job, or anything like that would constitute as being part of the cover-up. Guilt after the fact. I think that would have been the case with a lot of people and Dallas police, not just only with their handling of Oswald while he was alive, but his murder as well. Really good example of that is the three detectives that were with Ruby up on the fifth floor jail with Patrick Dean. The story goes that Ruby sang like a bird up there about how he walked down the Main Street ramp to then get into places, 1 in a million chance, to be there perfectly in time for when Oswald would come out to shoot him. But Ruby didn't say anything about it. Didn't happen. It was something that was manufactured by Dean, because Dean was the only one that said, talked about it and mentioned it. And these three detectives, they all gave their initial reports for the DPD. Wrote statements for Chief Curry. They didn't mention Ruby saying any such thing up on the fifth floor, but clearly they were told, you need to get behind what Dean's saying. So the reference to Ruby talking about how he entered down the Main Street ramp started coming out in all their statements thereafter, and they stuck to it until they got the death sentence and the Warren Commission thereafter. So I think that's an example of how cover up, falling behind comrades, for whether the full reason or not. I think that definitely took place for sure.
The thing for me, I would say that the revelation as far as the Dallas police went would have been after the shooting. For me, this tells me that there's something wrong. It's the reaction after. It wasn't bad enough that they didn't supply adequate protection, but it was after the shooting where they, for instance, they manipulated some of the evidence. Let me give you an example. The 38 shells found at the Tippit murder scene, the spent 38 shells. Shells were not photographed in position as found. The witnesses who found the shells could not identify those shells as the shells they found. Officer Poe, who marked the shells at the murder scene, could not find his mark on any of the shells in evidence. The shells in evidence do not match the bullets removed from Tippit's body in number and manufacturer. There were initials on the shells that did not correspond to anyone in the chain of custody. The shells found at the scene were originally identified as automatics, and corrosion on these shells indicate that they were in a gun belt or a bullet slide for a long period of time. Neither one of them Oswald owned. So these shells didn't come from Oswald. Where did they come from? That this is the way they manipulated evidence. They used this evidence. Now, I'm not arguing that the shells weren't fired from the handgun. I'm arguing that the shells weren't fired from the handgun at 10th and Patton Ave. They might have been fired by the police in a police firing range or something, and kept and initialed by the people who fired them. But those shells were not. I don't believe those shells were fired there. I think those were substituted for the real shoot. Now, the same thing with the paper bag. The paper bag, to me, the paper bag was manufactured by police because it matched the paper and the tape that was on the shipping table on the afternoon of the assassination. What's the chances when the FBI examined all the tape and all the paper, they found out none of them matched? So what's the chances of getting the exact same paper and tape on the shipping room table that's in the bag unless you made it right at that time? It's obvious, and it's not in the crime scene photographs. Why isn't it in the crime scene photographs if it was on the 6th floor? So all of this stuff, to me, again, this is all stuff that happened after the shooting. And this shows you that there's something else going on here, that this case is not legitimate and the evidence is not authentic. So this is what I think, that the Dallas police, the revelation of the corruptness of the Dallas police was more apparent after the shooting than before.
I definitely think they had some select few people that could help them out in these certain instances that they were placed in. Whether it was like, I have an example that came afterwards. This person wasn't found out until 1964 by the FBI when they're still investigating conspiracy leads, which is like, if you had your man, then why are you still investigating it? A.D. Hodge, he owned a trading post / bar, but he gave a statement saying that he had worked and furnished information to the FBI on multiple instances. But he explained that one night he was called by Decker to, it might be Fritz's office. to go identify a rifle that he could have potentially sold that matches the rifle that they had in evidence that Oswald allegedly used. And he goes there at 1 o'clock in the morning to the Dallas police thing. And it's really weird, his account. He talked about going and Fritz telling him to park in the basement. And he's like, what about my car? He's like, don't worry about it. You can park there. He gets into the elevator with another officer who he doesn't remember who it was. Goes up the elevator. As soon as they go up there, they hear literally on the speaker in the whole Dallas police headquarters that someone needs to move their car out of the basement. So he has to go back down the elevator, comes in contact with Jack Ruby. So this is like, I think this is after Oswald has been arrested. Comes in contact with Ruby in the elevator. The guy cracks a joke and says, oh, no, don't tell me they arrested you too, Hodge. And then the officers acknowledged, I have their statements and clips up on my YouTube. The officers did acknowledge that Ruby was there and he did say something about the arrest, but everyone had a good chuckle. The next thing you know, he moved his car from the basement, goes back up into Fritz's office, and then says that no, the rifle that was up there wasn't the one that he had sold or anything like that. So whether they're pursuing leads or not, but that just gives more evidence as to why the hell was Ruby even in there at 1 o'clock in the morning. And Hodge found it a little bit suspicious that nobody questioned why Ruby was there at that time, because it was that early and there wasn't a whole lot of people hanging around and going on to certain floors. A.D. Hodge, that's his name. Look him up. But that came afterwards. That was a year almost afterwards his testimony was stated there. And then it gets chalked into the bottom of the Warren Commission volumes, where I'm like, I don't know, that's something after the effect where I start wondering how many people have statements or experience like that with one of these officers during the assassination that just weren't questioned or weren't found out because it wasn't publicized.
Mm. And how much that we rely on the word of only one person with so many statements and so many aspects. Only one person testified to, interacting with Ruby or taking a phone call from him, and many other instances where all we can do, unfortunately, is take the word of one person. Mm.
Well, for him, even there's the other officers that were in the elevator that stated.
There were others? Okay.
Yeah. So there's about 4 people that were in that elevator, including Ruby.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah.
He just didn't remember their names, but I have clips up about them. So if you see where A.D. Hodge is on my YouTube, you'll see the other 2 officers listed there. One who claimed it was him, and then the other one that was like, no, it was me. I was the guy. I think he named off somebody, another officer, Baker or something like that, but it wasn't Baker at all. It was a completely different officer. But for me, I don't know. I mean, what do you do? Do you rely on Roger Craig's statements? And then you come up with a witness that seems partially of what Roger Craig saw. But Fritz denied Roger Craig was even in the interrogation for one of the things when he was pointed out. Fritz denied that. Yeah, that's Bart Camp's work. Fritz denied that. But there's photos of Roger Craig in there.
It's in Fritz's Warren Commission testimony. He says that Craig came in.
Are you sure?
In Fritz's testimony, absolutely. I'm going to look it up right now.
Okay, go ahead.
100%.
Because I was pretty sure that they said that they denied, or I know that he asked him if he wanted to go into an interview room. That's based on Roger Craig's statements, but I don't remember Fritz ever recalling seeing Roger Craig or identifying him as being in there. Yeah, I see a letter that states that it says the window in front of my private office is approximately 41 inches by 47 inches. I'm sure this man standing in the outer part of the office had no trouble in seeing Oswald, as there would only be a distance of 6 feet from this window to where Oswald was sitting. And I can think of no reason why I would need to bring him in the office for identification after he had been looking at it through the window. Because I know he brought him in there for identification purposes, but this is to Joseph A. Ball, signed Captain J.W. Fritz. In answer to the question about Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig, I think this is the same deputy who came to my outer office during the Oswald investigation, but I don't remember ever being in my office. I have talked with different officers, Mr. Sims, Mr. Boyd, Lieutenant Baker, and others who remember him coming into the outer office. And Baker remembers calling me out of the office to speak to this man. He was an officer and had no doubt been outside my outer office by the officers guarding the door. But I don't see him actually going in there, or Fritz admitting to him actually being in the interrogation room when Oswald was being interrogated.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to add this on to this part here, but has any information for you guys about the Dallas Police Department or any statements or interviews that you've come across done by individual researchers that has kind of illuminated more about the just the climate of Dallas or the Dallas police officers? I had done one, and it is hearsay, but a guy who had interviewed, oh, I don't remember if I don't think it's Fritz or not. I think it's Jesse Curry. Never mind. Scratch that. I'm not gonna be able to even repeat off what he said. Never mind. Go ahead. Has there been any interviews for you guys that has kind of illuminated you more about the DPD based on individual research aspects of maybe Mark Lane or anybody that was able to actually conduct something that was good footage that you saw on YouTube, whether it was another researcher that had it clipped up there or just a question somebody might have asked?
I'll probably go back to Seth Cantor. He was there when Oswald was shot. He was there as part of the press detail, but he was from Dallas himself. And frustratingly, his book, and I've got it right here. I'm kind of working off it. It's I don't know if you can see that Ruby cover up. Yeah. Anyway, it's a good book, but it goes into literally no detail about what he saw during the shooting. But Cantor did stay on the trail of Ruby and wrote a couple of books. But I might actually throw in a bit of something from left field here. The Warren Commission, Bert Griffin and Leon Hubert, who were the two leads for the Warren Commission in regards to Ruby, they were on to a few things. They wrote a memorandum in the middle of May, having sat through Patrick Dean and a whole bunch of others testifying about Ruby and things to do with the shooting. And they came away with a big list of questions over the DPD. They went to Dallas, absolutely sure that they would not, the DPD would remain, they would not give anything and all of that. But they really pushed and to the point where they wanted to include its own chapter in the Warren Commission about Oswald shooting. And you can actually find their proposed chapter on it. And they had a big spotlight on Patrick Dean. They even wanted to question Henry Wade a little bit more. But the thing that really cut them off the pass was they were getting into Jack Ruby's links to Cuba, gun running and things, and that's what basically sunk it in the water. And that's getting back to what and Gil, you were talking about, the whole Bay of Pigs and the Cuba aspect of Dallas and New Orleans to a degree as well. That was coming up even after Oswald's shooting and to do with Jack Ruby. So that is all on the Mary Farrell Foundation. You can find it's very insightful, but in terms of turning up things that this was 14 years before the HSCA, did something a little bit more in terms of prodding the Ruby shooting Oswald matter. But that's I think a little known aspect is Bert Griffin and Leon Hubert. They were digging and they were getting pretty far, but they were yanked away from it.
Yeah, for me, it's not so much as videos, YouTube videos, but I got a couple of books recently that I'm looking at. One was Dallas 1963. That's the title of it. The other one is Nut Country. I've been reading that one too. And I just ordered one called Strange Peaches that talks about the atmosphere in Dallas before the assassination. And I haven't got that book yet. I'm not going to get that till next week, according to Amazon. So I'll read that one when I get a chance. But it'll give us a little bit more insight into what Dallas was like before the assassination and what the atmosphere was. I do have some documents where people who visited Dallas as early as 1961 claimed that if Kennedy ever went to Dallas, they'd kill him. So there was already an atmosphere early on in the Kennedy administration, anti-Kennedy atmosphere in Dallas. I mean, Lyndon Johnson was attacked in 1960 when he went down there to campaign, him and his wife. So there was always this Southerners versus Northerners and go Yankee, go home kind of thing atmosphere down there. But steps that the Kennedy administration took, I think, even made it even worse. Like I said, the selling of jets to a communist country, that would be they'd be against that. The removal of prayer in school in 1962, they were against that. There were all of these things that were happening. The Bay of Pigs, where Kennedy backed out, he wouldn't use the military to back him up. And you know what? They knew that. They knew that the Bay of Pigs was going to fail without a military assistance. They knew that. They thought, who's a new guy as a president? He doesn't know jack shit. Okay, we can manipulate this guy into using the military by sending these guys in. They knew it's a suicide mission. Talk about numbers: 2,500 guys against 250,000. I mean, come on. There's no way it's going to happen. So they knew all of this. The CIA lied to him. He found that out later, that he had been deceived, and the CIA ran their own. They ran their own program on Cuba after that, and even Kennedy's assistants in his administration said that the president knew nothing about the assassination plans to kill Castro. He didn't know anything about that, and so all of this culminated, I believe, in Dallas. I think that part of it was he had promised the Russians to get the missiles removed. He promised the Russians they wouldn't attack Cuba anymore. They wouldn't help anybody else attack Cuba. And so he had given up on Cuba. And I think this was probably the motive. I mean, the people that were involved in the cover-up were the very people who gained from Kennedy's death. I mean, Lyndon Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover, two guys who gained from Kennedy being killed, being removed from office. And they were in charge of the cover-up. Johnson called the Dallas police and said, "You got your man, investigation's over, period. We don't want to hear any more about an international communist conspiracy. We don't want to hear that. It's over. You got your guy, it's over." That's it. There's your American justice. The guy's not even guilty, but he's going to get blamed for it because whoever was responsible for it, we don't want people to know.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate you giving me the time to talk about the Dallas police on this episode. I guess if for any recommendation for researchers out there when it comes to examining the Dallas police, do you trust certain sources over other sources when it comes to records, anything like that? I honestly think that the Texas History website's not too bad about certain things. And with the Dallas Police Archives, you can find a lot of footage, at least photographs and things of that sort, at least their headquarters in Commerce Street and other areas.
The Mary Farrell Foundation is massive, very good. You can search it for free and go through all the documents that it's collected. But if it's not on there, then it's not out there. I've found it's a very valuable resource, absolutely worth the subscription to pay for and have unlimited searches and downloads. So my big pick is Mary Farrell Foundation.
Yeah, that's probably the best one. It's probably the best site. History Matters, and you get if you do the Mary Farrell search. I think you get 3 free searches, and then you got to subscribe. So, but the History Matters website is it's got all the documents, all the testimony and stuff like that, commission documents. So either one of those, it's got House Select Committee on Assassination, it's got the Church Committee, it's got the AIRB stuff. And so either one of those is good for information. And on my website, I got all of that's what I'm linked up to. When I put something down or a quote or something, I put down the source and I always link to that site because it's so reliable. So yeah, Mary Farrell and History Matters, they're kind of like the same site. They're kind of like connected, but either one is very good.
Your one friend that I think I mentioned on your first episode that has that website that was going to expire, I don't remember who it was. I think it was whokilledjfk.net.
Yeah, Who Killed JFK net.
Yeah, I don't know who was in charge of that, but the website happened to expire and it was upsetting because I was like, damn, this guy had passed away and he paid for a couple extra years on his website for you
Yeah,
to check
yeah. And
out.
his wife didn't. The wife didn't want
Well,
to.
she re-upped it because I went back there like a month later and yeah, it was re-upped. Yeah, someone had paid for it again. So I was like, thank God she did that. Start screenshotting everybody.
She told me she was going to let it go this year.
Well, she
That's
didn't. So if she's listening, tell her my heart goes out to her.
good. Good for her. Yeah, there's a lot of clown stuff on there. It's
I like it.
him taking shots at people and
I
stuff
know. I love it.
that he has problems with in the news groups. He's not bashful either. He uses some pretty vulgar stuff. It's kind of funny when you look at it, but that's the way he was. He was a character, and I enjoyed going over his house. I went over his house and visited with him a couple of times. And this was a guy who he knew his stuff. When it came to the JFK assassination, he knew his stuff. He was very tight with Harold Weisberg, and him and Harold Weisberg were good friends. And Harold gave him some advice. He said, and he passed it on to me. So he said, hit him with the evidence. When you get into these arguments and these debates hit him with the evidence. That's all you got to do. And that to me, I think that was pretty good advice.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate the time you guys gave me to do this. I'm going to make sure I link all your links in the description below so people will be able to find any links that you guys might send to me later. I'll make sure to go back and link this into the episode because, Paul, I know you got some things that are going to be coming out. Gil, I got your website. I'm going to make sure that's in the description. And thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.